The BMW's headlights cut through the November dusk like accusations. Sophie Richmond sat motionless in her Honda Civic, knuckles white against the steering wheel, watching her husband of 12 years press his lips against another woman's forehead in the parking lot of Harborview Apartments, their apartment complex. The younger woman, mid-20s, blonde, wearing Daniel's Northwester hoodie, laughed at something he said, tilting her head back with an intimacy that made Sophie's stomach turn. Daniel's hand rested on the small of her back, possessive and familiar. The same way he used to touch Sophie before the distance crept in, before the late nights at the office became routine, before I love you became, I'll be home late. Sophie's breath came in short, sharp gasps. The heating vents blew stale air across her face, but she felt nothing except the white-hot rage building in her chest. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text from Daniel sent 20 minutes ago, stuck in traffic. Home by 8. Love you. Lies. All lies. She watched Daniel lean in again, whispering something that made the woman giggle and sweat his chest playfully. They stood between the rows of parked cars, bathed in the amber glow of streetlights, completely unaware they had an audience. Something inside Sophie snapped. Her hands moved before her mind could catch up. The engine roared to life. She shifted into drive, her vision tunneling until all she could see was Daniel's silver BMW M5 parked 20 feet away, the car he loved more than anything, the car he washed every Sunday morning, the car he'd chosen over the family vacation she'd wanted. The Honda lurched forward. "Sophie, what are you?" Her own voice sounded distant, dreamlike. The impact was thunderous. Metal screamed against metal as her front bumper plowed into the BMW's driver's side, crumpling the door like aluminum foil. The alarm shrieked into the evening air, a wailing siren that matched the chaos in her heart. Daniel's face contorted in horror. "What the hell?" Sophie reversed, her hands shaking violently now, and hit the gas again. Another sickening crunch. The BMW's side mirror exploded, plastic and glass scattering across the asphalt like shrapnel. Faces appeared in windows. Doors opened. Neighbors emerged from their apartments, drawn by the commotion like moths to flame. Mrs. Chun from 3B. The college kids from the ground floor. Old Mr. Patterson with his terrier. All of them witnesses to Sophie Richmond's carefully constructed life shattering in real time. Daniel sprinted toward her car, his face purple with rage and panic. "Sophie, stop. Stop." But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She reversed one more time, and this time when she accelerated, she felt something break free inside her. 12 years of swallowed complaints, buried resentments, and ignored intuition finally finding release. The third impact shattered the BMW's rear window. Only then did Sophie throw the Honda into park. She sat there, chest heaving, staring at the wreckage she'd created. The BMW listed to one side, its sleek lines now a twisted sculpture of her fury. Daniel stood frozen, his mouth moving soundlessly, the blonde woman clutching his arm with wide, terrified eyes. Sophie's door opened. She stepped out into the cool evening air, suddenly aware of the 20-plus neighbors watching her with expressions ranging from shock to poorly concealed satisfaction. The alarm continued its banshee wail. She walked past Daniel without looking at him, her heels clicking against the pavement with surprising steadiness. As she reached the entrance to their building, she finally spoke, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I hope she was worth it." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than the crashes. 3 months earlier, Sophie Richmond had always prided herself on her instincts. As a senior project manager at Castellan Architecture, she'd built her career on reading between the lines, noticing the details others missed, sensing when something was off about a proposal or a timeline or a client's true intentions. So when Daniel started coming home smelling like unfamiliar perfume in August, she noticed. When he suddenly became protective of his phone, angling the screen away from her on the couch, she noticed. When he stopped asking about her day, stopped laughing at her jokes, stopped reaching for her hand during their Sunday morning coffee ritual, she noticed. But noticing and acknowledging are two different beasts entirely. You're being paranoid, her best friend Jasmine had said over lunch at their usual spot downtown. Jasmine twirled pasta around her fork, her dark eyes sympathetic but skeptical. Daniel's a lot of things, Soph, but a cheater? The man cried during your wedding vows. That was 12 years ago, Sophie had replied, pushing her salad around her plate without eating.
People change, Jazz.
We've changed. All marriages go through rough patches. You've both been stressed, you with the Millennium Tower project, him with that promotion he's gunning for. Maybe you two just need a weekend away. Reconnect. Sophie had wanted to believe her. She'd tried to believe her. She'd even suggested the weekend getaway to Daniel that night, finding him in his home office, blue light from his laptop casting shadows across his face. A weekend away? He'd barely looked up from his screen. Sophie, I'm drowning here. Thompson wants the Henderson pitch by Friday, and I'm nowhere near ready. Can we talk about this later? We never talk anymore, Daniel. That's the problem. That's not fair. His jaw had tightened, the expression he made when he felt attacked. I'm busting my backside to make partner, to give us the life we want. I thought you understood that. The life we want? Or the life you want? He'd finally looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment Sophie had seen something flicker across his face. Guilt? Exhaustion? She couldn't tell anymore. I'm tired, sophomore. Can we not do this tonight? So they hadn't done it that night. Or the next night. Or the next. Instead, Sophie had done what she'd sworn she'd never do. She'd started checking. She'd casually picked up his phone when he was in the shower, only to find it now required a fingerprint she didn't have saved. She'd logged into their cell phone account and studied the call logs, finding dozens of calls to an unknown number, sometimes lasting 40 minutes or more. She'd driven past his office at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday when he texted that he was working late, only to find his assigned parking spot empty. And still, she'd said nothing. Because saying something made it real. Confronting him meant potentially confirming her worst fears, and there was a shameful comfort in uncertainty. Schrodinger's marriage, simultaneously alive and dead until she opened the box. The breaking point came on a Thursday in late October. Sophie had been working from home, nursing a migraine, when she decided to surprise Daniel with lunch at his office. She'd ordered from his favorite Thai place, picked up his beloved mango sticky rice, and driven to the glass tower downtown where Hartwell and Associates occupied the 18th floor. The receptionist, Kelly, a sweet girl fresh out of college, had looked confused when Sophie arrived. "Oh, Mrs. Richmond, is Daniel expecting you?" "No, it's a surprise." "Is he in his office?" Kelly's confusion had deepened. "He's not here. He took a personal day, said he had a doctor's appointment this morning." The styrofoam containers had suddenly felt heavy in Sophie's hands. A doctor's appointment? That's what he told Mr. Hartwell. Is everything okay? Sophie had smiled. She'd gotten good at smiling through discomfort. Yes, of course. I must have gotten my days mixed up. My mistake. She'd thrown the Thai food in a dumpster 3 blocks away and cried in her car for 20 minutes before driving home to their empty apartment. That night, when Daniel had returned at 7:30, whistling as he hung up his coat, Sophie had asked casually, "How is work?" "Brutal," he'd replied without missing a beat. "Thompson had me revising the McCormick contract for 6 hours straight. I'm exhausted." The lie had been so smooth, so effortless, that Sophie had actually felt impressed in a sick way. How many other lies had been this easy for him? "Did you eat?" she'd asked. "Grab something at the office. I'm going to shower and crash. Big day tomorrow." He'd kissed the top of her head, a gesture once affectionate, now feeling like a period at the end of a sentence, and disappeared into the bathroom. Sophie had sat at their kitchen table, listening to the water run, and made a decision. She was done pretending, done making excuses, done living in the limbo of maybe. She'd needed proof, something concrete. So she'd started actually looking. Finding evidence of Daniel's affair had been easier than Sophie expected, which somehow made it worse. If he'd been careful, meticulous, covering his tracks like a spy, that would have meant something. That he'd cared enough about her, about them, to at least hide it well. But Daniel had been sloppy. The credit card statement she'd pulled up online showed charges she didn't recognize. Dinner for two at Rousseau, a French restaurant downtown that Daniel had always claimed was overpriced and pretentious when Sophie suggested they go for their anniversary. A hotel room at the Meridian on a Tuesday afternoon. Flowers from a boutique florist sent to an address she'd Google mapped, a townhouse in Lincoln Park. The charges told a story Daniel clearly thought she'd never read. Sophie had printed them out, her hands surprisingly steady, and tucked them into a folder she kept in her desk drawer at work. Evidence. Just in case. The just in case had felt important at the time, though she couldn't articulate why. Just in case he denied it? Just in case she needed them for a lawyer? Just in case she started doubting her own reality? Jasmine had finally stopped dismissing her concerns when Sophie had shown her the credit card statements over drinks at Jasmine's apartment. Oh, honey. Jasmine's usual optimism had crumbled. I'm so sorry. I should have taken you more seriously. I needed someone to tell me I was wrong, Sophie had said, staring at her wine glass. I needed it to be paranoia. Have you confronted him?
No.
Are you going to? I don't know. Sophie had laughed bitterly. What's the protocol here? Do I wait for the right moment? Is there a right moment to tell your husband you know he's cheating? Is there an app for that? Sophie. We don't even fight anymore, Jazz. We're so polite to each other. How was your day? Fine, thanks. Want coffee? Sure, thanks. We're like strangers playing house. Jasmine had reached across the table, squeezing Sophie's hand. You deserve better than this. You know that, right? Do I? The question had come out smaller than Sophie intended. Maybe I drove him to this. Maybe if I'd been more attentive, more exciting, more... Stop. Jasmine's voice had been sharp. Don't you dare blame yourself for his choices.
He could have talked to you.
He could have suggested counseling. He could have done literally anything except betray you. This is on him, Sophie. All of it. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were oceans apart. Late at night, while Daniel slept beside her, or pretended to sleep, Sophie would lie awake cataloging her perceived failures. Had she let herself go? She'd gained maybe 10 pounds since the wedding, but she was 42, not 22. Had she been too focused on work? But Daniel had always supported her career, praised her ambition. Had she been boring in bed? They'd certainly been having less of it, but he'd never complained, never initiated discussions about what he wanted or needed. The questions spiraled endlessly, a tornado of self-doubt that left her exhausted and hollow. In early November, Sophie had made an appointment with Dr. Patricia Owens, a divorce attorney whose name she'd gotten from a colleague who'd recently separated from her husband. I'm not sure I want a divorce, Sophie had admitted during their consultation, sitting in Dr. Owens's modern downtown office. I just want to know what my options are. Dr. Owens, a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, had nodded understandingly. Knowledge is power, Mrs. Richmond. Let's talk about your situation. They discussed assets, timelines, Illinois law, what evidence mattered in court. Dr. Owens had been thorough and compassionate, never once making Sophie feel stupid or weak for her indecision. Take your time, Dr. Owens had said as their hour concluded. But document everything. Keep records. Protect yourself financially. Open your own account if you haven't already. Make sure you have access to all statements and documents. You don't have to make any decisions today, but being prepared gives you options. Sophie had left feeling simultaneously empowered and terrified. The fact that she was consulting divorce lawyers made it real in a way that credit card statements and suspicious phone calls hadn't. This wasn't just a rough patch anymore. This was the potential end of her marriage. That evening, she'd come home to find Daniel in an unusually good mood, singing along to the radio while cooking dinner, something he rarely did anymore. Hey, babe. He'd actually smiled at her, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I'm making your favorite lemon chicken with roasted vegetables. The domestic normalcy had felt surreal. What's the occasion? No occasion. Just felt like cooking. He'd walked over and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. I know I've been distant lately. Work's been crazy, but I want to make more of an effort. You're important to me, sophomore. We're important. She'd stood rigid in his embrace, fighting the urge to push him away. Part of her had wanted to melt into him, to believe this meant he'd ended whatever affair he was having, that he'd chosen her, chosen them. But another part, the part that had seen the credit card charges that had caught him in lies, knew this was performance art. Maybe the other woman had ended things. Maybe he was feeling guilty. Maybe he was love-bombing her to throw her off the scent. That's nice, she'd said neutrally, extracting herself from his arms. I need to change. Long day. She'd escaped to their bedroom, her heart hammering, and texted Jasmine. He's acting weird. Being super affectionate. I don't know what game he's playing, but I hate it. Jasmine's response had been immediate. Trust your gut. You know what you know. Sophie had trusted her gut. And her gut had told her that whatever Daniel was doing, whether ending the affair or simply getting better at hiding it, didn't erase what had already happened. The trust was broken. The marriage was broken. And no amount of lemon chicken could fix that. The day Sophie had crashed her car into Daniel's BMW had started like any other betrayal-tinged morning. Daniel had left for work at 7:30 after a perfunctory kiss on her cheek. Sophie had gone into the office for an early morning meeting about the Millennium Tower project, which was somehow both ahead of schedule and over budget, a contractor's nightmare. By 3 p.m., she'd had a splitting headache and decided to work from home for the rest of the day. The November weather had turned bitter, dark clouds promising rain, matching her mood perfectly. She'd texted Daniel, heading home early.
Migraine. See you tonight.
No response. Typical. Sophie had driven home in silence, not bothering with music or podcasts, letting the gray day seep into her bones. She'd been thinking about Dr. Owens's advice, about opening her own bank account, about what splitting their assets would actually look like in practice. The apartment was in both their names. She'd contributed 40% of the down payment. He'd paid 60%. How did you divide a life? She'd been so lost in thought that she'd almost missed it. Daniel's BMW pulling into the parking lot ahead of her. She'd slowed instinctively, watching him park in his usual spot, wondering why he was home so early. Another doctor's appointment. Another personal day he'd lied about? Then she'd seen the passenger door open. A woman had emerged, young, blonde, laughing at something Daniel said as they walked around to the back of the car. Daniel had popped the trunk, pulling out shopping bags. Expensive-looking bags from boutiques Sophie recognized. The woman had pulled out a coat, a beautiful camel-colored wool coat that probably cost a month's rent, and tried it on, spinning around like a child. Daniel had watched her with an expression Sophie recognized because it used to be directed at her. Adoration mixed with desire mixed with pride. The woman had kissed him. Not a friendly peck, but a real kiss, full of promise and intimacy. Daniel had kissed her back, his hands in her hair, completely unguarded in a way he never was with Sophie anymore. Sophie had pulled into a spot 3 rows back, partially hidden by an SUV, and simply watched. She'd felt strangely detached, as if she were watching actors in a play rather than her husband with his mistress. They'd eventually broken apart, Daniel checking his phone, probably looking for Sophie's text, and saying something that made the woman nod. They'd gathered the shopping bags and walked toward the apartment building, but instead of going inside, they'd stopped in the parking lot, talking. The woman had been wearing his Northwestern hoodie, Sophie had realized. The one she'd bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. That detail had hurt more than it should have. It wasn't enough to betray her. He had to dress his mistress in gifts Sophie had given him. The conversation had continued, Daniel's hands animated, the woman laughing, and Sophie had felt something inside her calcify into pure, cold rage. Not sadness. Not devastation. Just rage. All the months of suspicion, all the gaslighting, all the lonely nights wondering what was wrong with her, all the self-blame and second-guessing, it crystallized into a single, burning need to make him feel what she felt. To take something he loved and destroy it the way he'd destroyed their marriage. Her hands had moved to the ignition. The engine had roared to life. And Sophie Richmond, who had never even gotten a speeding ticket, who alphabetized her spice rack and color-coded her closet, who prided herself on maintaining composure in even the most stressful situations, had done the most impulsive thing she'd ever done. She'd pressed the gas pedal and aimed for the thing Daniel loved most in this world besides himself, his precious BMW. The police had arrived 12 minutes after the crash. By then, Sophie had locked herself in their apartment, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, listening to Daniel's frantic knocking and shouting through the door. "Sophie, open the door. We need to talk about this. You're insane. Do you know how much that car cost? Sophie, please. Just open the door." She'd sat perfectly still, watching the wine catch the lamplight, ruby red and somehow calming. The knocking had eventually stopped. Voices had murmured in the hallway, Daniel talking to someone, probably the blonde. Then footsteps retreating. The intercom had buzzed. "Mrs. Richmond? This is Officer Patterson with Chicago PD. We need to speak with you about the incident in the parking lot." Sophie had buzzed them up, opened the door to find two officers, one older, weathered, looking like he'd seen everything twice, one younger, female, with sympathetic eyes. "Mrs. Richmond, I'm Officer Patterson. This is Officer Chen. Can we come in?" She'd stepped aside, gesturing them into the apartment she'd decorated with such care, the throw pillows she'd agonized over, the art prints from their honeymoon in Barcelona, the life they'd built together now a stage set for its own demolition. "Ma'am, we received a report that you intentionally struck your husband's vehicle with your own car. Multiple times. Is that accurate?" Sophie had nodded, her voice steady.
Yes.
"I hit his car." "Can you tell us why you did that?" "Because he's having an affair, and I found him with her in our parking lot. He lied about being at work. So I hit his car." She'd stated it simply, factually, as if reporting the weather. Officer Chun had glanced at her partner. Officer Patterson had shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic drama unfolding before him. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but destruction of property is still illegal, even if the property belongs to your spouse. Your husband could press charges." "Let him." Sophie had taken a sip of wine. "I'm sure his girlfriend would love to testify in court about their relationship." "Sophie." Daniel had appeared in the doorway, breathless, his hair disheveled. The blonde was conspicuously absent. "Can we talk privately? Please." "We're not done here, sir," Officer Patterson had said firmly. "I'm her husband. We need to discuss this as a family matter. After you cheated on me, we're not a family anymore, Daniel." Sophie's voice had remained eerily calm. "We're just two people who share an apartment and a marriage certificate that's about to become worthless." Daniel's face had gone through several emotions: anger, embarrassment, calculation. "Officers, I don't want to press charges. My wife is obviously distraught. This is a personal matter we can resolve privately." Officer Patterson had looked at Sophie. "Ma'am, even if your husband doesn't press charges, if there were witnesses who felt endangered." "I didn't endanger anyone. I hit an empty car. Multiple times. Very deliberately." Despite the gravity of the situation, Officer Chen had briefly suppressed a smile. Officer Patterson had cleared his throat. "We'll need to file a report. Mrs. Richmond, I strongly advise you to contact a lawyer. Mr. Richmond, I suggest you both cool off tonight. Find separate spaces if possible." "This is my apartment too," Daniel had protested. "Then I'd recommend Mrs. Richmond find somewhere else to stay," Officer Patterson had replied. "But given the circumstances, it would be wise for you both to have some distance." After the officers left, Sophie and Daniel had stood in their living room, the weight of 12 years and countless lies hanging between them like smoke. "Sophie, don't." She'd held up her hand. "I don't want to hear it. I don't want your explanations or your excuses or your apologies. I want you to leave. This is my apartment too. You can't kick me out. Then I'll leave." She'd stood, setting down her wine glass with deliberate care. "I'll pack a bag and stay with Jasmine. But Daniel, I want you out of here by the weekend. Find somewhere else. Move in with her, for all I care. I don't want to see you." We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Sophie had walked past him toward the bedroom. You made your choice. You've been making it for months. Now I'm making mine. You destroyed my car. She'd paused in the doorway, looking back at him.
Yeah.
I did. And you know what? It felt really, really good. Jasmine's guest room had become Sophie's sanctuary. For 3 days, she'd stayed cocooned there, calling in sick to work for the first time in 5 years, ignoring the dozens of texts and calls from Daniel, letting herself finally, fully fall apart. She'd cried until her eyes were swollen. She'd rage-cleaned Jasmine's bathroom at 2 a.m. She'd eaten an entire pizza by herself while watching romantic comedies that now felt like cruel jokes. She'd written and deleted countless text messages to Daniel, ranging from heartbroken, "How could you do this to us?" to vitriolic, unprintable. Jasmine had been a saint, taking time off work to sit with her, never once saying, "I told you so," just being present and providing an endless supply of ice cream and tissues. "What's wrong with me?" Sophie had asked on the third night, curled up on Jasmine's couch in an old college sweatshirt, her hair unwashed, makeup-free and raw. "Nothing is wrong with you," Jasmine had said firmly. "Daniel is an idiot who threw away something real for something shiny and new. That's about his character, not your worth." "I should have seen it coming. Should have confronted him earlier. Should have. Should have, could have, would have." "Stop. You did the best you could with the information you had. And when you found out the truth, Jasmine had paused, fighting a smile. "You made a very dramatic statement." Despite everything, Sophie had laughed. "I can't believe I did that." "I can. You've been holding everything in for so long. You were a volcano, sophomore bound to erupt eventually. The whole neighborhood saw. Mrs. Chin will never look at me the same way." "Mrs. Chin probably respects you more now. You stood up for yourself. By committing vehicular violence." "Vehicular justice," Jasmine had corrected. "There's a difference." Sophie's phone had buzzed for the 100th time. Another message from Daniel. "Please call me. We need to talk about next steps. I've contacted a mediator." A mediator, not a marriage counselor. Not a therapist. A mediator for divorce proceedings. He wasn't even trying to fight for them. "He's already planning the divorce," Sophie had said, showing Jasmine the message.
Good.
Makes it easier. No dragging it out, no false hope. Clean break. But it didn't feel clean. It felt messy and painful, and like she was being skinned alive. On the 4th day, Sophie had finally called Dr. Owens. "I saw the news," Dr. Owens had said, her tone carefully neutral. "There was a story about a domestic incident in Harborview Apartments. I assumed that might have been you." "It made the news?" Sophie had felt her stomach drop. "Local news, brief mention. No names. A woman crashed into her husband's car after discovering his affair, kind of story. The internet thinks you're a hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm a mess." "You're a woman who reached her breaking point. That's human. Now, let's talk about how we move forward strategically." They'd spent 90 minutes on the phone, Dr. Owens outlining the divorce process, what Sophie should document, what she should avoid saying or doing, how to protect her assets and her future. "The car incident actually works in your favor," Dr. Owens had explained. "It demonstrates provocation. No one was injured, and it sounds like Mr. Richmond isn't pressing charges. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state anyway, but his infidelity establishes grounds for contested proceedings if he tries to be difficult about the settlement." "I don't want to fight," Sophie had said tiredly. "I just want it to be over." "I understand. But you need to fight for what's fair. Don't let guilt or exhaustion make you accept less than you deserve. You're entitled to half of all marital assets acquired during the marriage. That includes his retirement accounts, his bonuses, everything. Don't let him or his lawyer bully you into thinking otherwise." After hanging up with Dr. Owens, Sophie had sat in Jasmine's guest room, staring at her reflection in the window. She looked like a stranger, hollowed out, older than her 42 years, battle-worn. But beneath the exhaustion, she'd seen something else: determination. She'd survived the worst of it: the discovery, the public humiliation, the collapse of her marriage. The hard part was over. Now came the rebuild. Sophie had returned to work the following Monday, walking into the office with her head high despite the curious glances from colleagues who'd clearly heard some version of the story. Architecture was a small world in Chicago. Gossip traveled fast. Her assistant, Marcus, had greeted her with coffee and sympathy. "Welcome back. You okay?" "Getting there," Sophie had replied. "What did I miss?" Millennium Tower is still a disaster. The Henderson firm wants to meet about their corporate campus design, and there's 17 emails from Alan asking where you were. Marcus had paused. "Also, everyone here thinks you're a badass." Sophie had blinked. "What?" "The car thing. With your husband. Half the women in this office want to buy you drinks. You're basically a legend." She'd laughed despite herself. "I committed a crime, Marcus. You made a statement. There's a difference." Apparently, public opinion had sided firmly with Sophie. The story had indeed made local news, and while no names were mentioned, enough details had leaked through social media that she'd become a minor viral sensation. #ParkingLotRevenge had trended locally. Someone had made a TikTok about it that had gotten 3 million views. Sophie had been simultaneously mortified and oddly touched by the support from complete strangers. Women she'd never met had sent messages through her social media accounts sharing their own stories of betrayal and how they'd wished they'd had her courage. "You did what we all fantasize about," one message had read. "You're living proof that women don't have to just cry and take it. Thank you." But the public support hadn't made the private pain any easier. Daniel had moved out of their apartment as requested, leaving behind only his half of the furniture and a note that Sophie had found on the kitchen counter. "Sophie, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to say this. I never meant to hurt you. Things between us have been difficult for a long time, and I made terrible choices. I take full responsibility. Meredith didn't mean anything, it was a mistake that spiraled. I do want us to handle the divorce as amicably as possible. I've hired Stephen Walsh as my attorney. Dr. Owens should contact him to begin proceedings. For what it's worth, I am sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me. Daniel." Sophie had read the note 3 times, marveling at its cowardice. He'd named her, Meredith, as if giving the affair a name made it real, but somehow less his fault. He'd blamed their difficult relationship without acknowledging his role in making it difficult. He'd called it a mistake that spiraled, as if he'd accidentally tripped and fallen into a months-long affair. She'd torn the note into tiny pieces and thrown them away. The divorce proceedings had begun with all the romance of a root canal. Lawyers, paperwork, asset division spreadsheets. Their 12-year marriage reduced to line items and dollar amounts. Daniel had tried to fight for the apartment, claiming he'd contributed more to the down payment. Sophie had reminded him through Dr. Owens that she'd paid for all the renovations, all the furnishings, and all the maintenance for the past 8 years. He'd backed down. He tried to claim his bonuses should be excluded from marital assets since they were performance-based compensation. Dr. Owens had laughed and cited Illinois precedent. He'd backed down again. The only thing they'd actually fought over was the photo albums from their wedding and their honeymoon. Sophie had wanted them not because she planned to look at them. She never wanted to see those images of her younger, hopeful self again, but because she couldn't stand the idea of Daniel keeping them, showing them to Meredith, rewriting their history. In the end, they'd agreed to split them, each taking half. Sophie had boxed hers up and stored them in Jasmine's basement, unable to throw them away, but unwilling to keep them where she might accidentally see them. 3 months after the parking lot incident, on a cold February afternoon, Sophie had sat in Dr. Owens's office, signing the final divorce papers. "How do you feel?" Dr. Owens had asked, sliding the documents across the desk. "Lighter," Sophie had admitted. "Like I've been carrying something heavy and finally put it down." "That's a good sign. You're through the worst of it. What's next?" "Next, you live your life. You take that promotion you mentioned. You travel. You rediscover who Sophie Richmond is when she's not defined by marriage or betrayal. You heal." Sophie had signed her name, the pen making a soft scratching sound against paper, and felt the last thread connecting her to Daniel sever. 6 months later. Summer had transformed Chicago from gray and bitter to green and alive. Sophie stood in the empty apartment, their former apartment, now just hers, watching the last of Daniel's remaining items being loaded into a moving truck. She'd bought out his half with money from her recent promotion to associate director. The space was finally, completely hers. Jasmine leaned against the doorframe, 2 iced coffees in hand. How does it feel, being a completely independent woman of means?
Terrifying.
Exhilarating. Expensive. Sophie accepted the coffee gratefully. I can't believe I'm starting over at 42. You're not starting over. You're starting fresh. There's a difference. Over the past 6 months, Sophie had done more than just survive. She'd actually started to heal. She'd thrown herself into work, leading the Millennium Tower project to a successful completion ahead of the revised schedule. The promotion had come with a significant raise and the creative freedom she'd always wanted. She'd started therapy with Dr. Lisa Hernandez, spending every Tuesday evening unraveling the complicated knot of her feelings about the marriage, the betrayal, and her own identity separate from being someone's wife. She'd reconnected with old friends she'd neglected during the marriage's slow decline. She joined a book club. She'd started taking boxing classes, Jasmine's suggestion, and found unexpected joy in punching things legally and with proper protective equipment. She'd even been on a few dates, though nothing serious. Just reminders that there was life and possibility beyond Daniel. And most surprisingly, she'd made peace with the parking lot incident. The video had eventually surfaced online. Someone's Ring doorbell had caught the whole thing, and instead of being mortified, Sophie had watched it with a strange sense of pride. That woman in the video, furious and unleashed, had been protecting herself the only way she'd known how in that moment. She'd been powerful, uncontained, real. I saw Daniel last week, Jasmine said casually, sipping her coffee, at the Whole Foods on Ashland. Sophie's heart didn't race like it would have months ago. Was Meredith with him?
Yep.
She looked about 6 months pregnant. Sophie processed this, waiting for the wave of pain or jealousy or rage. But all she felt was a distant pity. So they're keeping it. Apparently. He looked miserable, sophomore. Like someone slowly dying inside while buying organic produce. Good. Sophie meant it. She can have him. The lying, the late nights, the emotional unavailability. That's her problem now. You really are over him. I really am. Sophie surprised herself with how true it was. I spent so many years trying to make him happy, trying to be enough. I realize now I was always enough. He was the one who was lacking. A knock on the door interrupted them. Sophie opened it to find Mrs. Chun from 3B, holding a potted orchid. Mrs. Richmond, or I suppose Ms. Richmond now, Mrs. Chun said with a warm smile. I heard you bought the apartment. I wanted to welcome you to your fresh start. Thank you, Mrs. Chun. That's very kind. The older woman leaned in conspiratorially. Between you and me, I never liked your husband. Too slick. You're better off. She patted Sophie's arm. And that car thing? Best entertainment this building's seen in 30 years. After Mrs. Chun left, Sophie and Jasmine dissolved into laughter. I've been canonized as the patron saint of scorned wives, Sophie said, wiping tears from her eyes. Could be worse. You could be known for taking him back. Never. Sophie looked around the apartment, her apartment, seeing it now not as a reminder of failure, but as a blank canvas. I'm going to repaint, get new furniture, make this place completely mine. Good plan. What color? I'm thinking about a deep blue for the bedroom. And maybe I'll finally knock down that wall Daniel always said was structurally important.
She grinned.
I'm an architect. I'll figure it out. Over the following weeks, Sophie had transformed the space entirely. She'd painted the walls in bold colors Daniel would have hated. She'd bought a velvet couch in emerald green because it made her happy. She'd hung art from local galleries, replaced the kitchen backsplash, and installed floating shelves for the books Daniel had always complained made the place look cluttered. She'd made it a home for one, and it was beautiful. On a Sunday morning in early September, Almost a year after the parking lot incident, Sophie sat on her new emerald couch with coffee and the newspaper, sunlight streaming through windows she'd had cleaned professionally. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw your ex and his new family at Navy Pier." She was yelling at him while pushing a stroller. "Thought you'd appreciate the update." Sophie smiled and deleted the message without responding. Daniel's life wasn't her concern anymore. She had her own life to live, a life that was messy and uncertain and entirely hers. She'd learned that sometimes the breaking point isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning. Sometimes you have to destroy something to discover what you're really made of underneath. And what Sophie Richmond was made of, she discovered, was steel. Not perfect. Not without scars. But unbreakable. She raised her coffee cup in a silent toast to the woman she'd been, the one who'd loved faithfully, who'd given everything, who'd believed in forever, and then to the woman she'd become, the one who'd learned that sometimes forever is just another word for until you're strong enough to leave. To new beginnings, she whispered to her empty, beautiful apartment. And then she turned the page. A year later, the gallery opening was crowded with Chicago's architecture elite. Sophie moved through the space with confidence, discussing her latest project, a sustainable housing complex designed for working families, with journalists and potential investors. Her firm had made her a full partner 6 months ago, the youngest female partner in Castellan Architecture's 40-year history. Sophie Richmond? A voice behind her made her turn. A woman in her 30s, stylishly dressed, holding a glass of wine. "I'm Jennifer Vasquez. I just wanted to say that I've followed your work since the Millennium Tower project. It's incredible." "Thank you," Sophie said warmly. "That's very kind. I also wanted to thank you for something else." Jennifer lowered her voice. "I was going through something similar with my ex-husband about 2 years ago. I saw the video of you in the parking lot, and it sounds crazy, but it gave me the courage to leave, to stop accepting crumbs and start demanding the whole meal." Sophie felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "That's not crazy at all. I'm glad you found your strength. We all need someone to show us it's possible. You showed me." Jennifer smiled. "I'm an architect too, actually. Junior associate at Morrison and Lee. Maybe we could get coffee sometime? Network. Or just talk." "I'd like that," Sophie said, meaning it. After Jennifer left, Sophie stood alone for a moment, looking at the architectural model in front of her, a building she designed from scratch, her vision made tangible. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hi, Sophie. This is Marcus's friend Ethan. He's been trying to set us up for weeks. Coffee sometime? No pressure." Sophie smiled and typed back, "Coffee sounds good. How about Saturday?" Life, she'd learned, had a funny way of circling back around. The woman who'd once felt so broken she'd destroyed a BMW in a parking lot was now building things again. Buildings, friendships, maybe even the possibility of love, though she wasn't rushing toward anything. She'd learned to trust herself again, to listen to her instincts, to know her worth. And most importantly, she'd learned that you could survive your breaking point and come out the other side not just intact but transformed. Better. Stronger.
Free.
Sophie Richmond finished her wine, said her goodbyes to the gallery attendees, and walked out into the Chicago night. The city lights reflected in the rain-slicked streets like promises of things yet to come. The breaking point, she understood now, had been a gift. It was the moment she'd finally broken free.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.